Welcome back to the channel. Like and sub if you enjoy the video, thank you. Chapter 70, A Break in the Case. The next morning, the tension in Chandrapur was palpable. Word of a near capture had spread quickly, and the villagers were more on edge than ever. But amidst the anxiety, there was also a sense of determination. Everyone knew that they were closer than ever to catching the saboteur. Priya and Ravi were already up and about, coordinating with Inspector Suresh. The device they had found the previous night was being analyzed at the police station, and they were anxiously awaiting the results. In the meantime, they couldn't afford to let their guard down. "We need to go over everything again," Priya said as she and Ravi met with the village council. "Every detail, no matter how small. There has to be something we've missed." The council agreed, and they spent the morning combing through the records and notes they had accumulated over the past weeks. Priya focused on surveillance footage, watching it frame by frame, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that might give them a clue. As the hours passed, frustration began to set in. It seemed as though they were chasing shadows. The saboteur was always one step ahead, slipping through their fingers like smoke. But then, just as the sun was reaching its zenith, Priya's phone buzzed. It was a message from Inspector Suresh. "We've found something. Come to the station immediately." Priya's heart leaped as she showed the message to Ravi. "This could be it," she said, her voice filled with hope. They wasted no time in heading to the police station. When they arrived, Suresh was waiting for them, a serious expression on his face. He led them into a small room where the device was laid out on a table, connected to a laptop. "Our tech team managed to crack it," Suresh explained, pointing to the screen. "It's a signal jammer, designed to disrupt communication between different components of your systems. But that's not all. We also found traces of a unique code embedded in the device. It's a signature of sorts, one that links this device to a series of similar incidents in other regions." Priya and Ravi exchanged glances. "So, this is an isolated case?" Ravi asked. Suresh shook his head. "No, it's part of a larger pattern. We've seen similar sabotage attempts in other villages that have recently modernized their infrastructure. The same kind of disruptions, the same kinds of devices. It looks like someone or a group is targeting villages like yours, possibly to undermine the progress you've made." "But why?" Priya asked, struggling to comprehend. What could they gain from this? "That's the million-dollar question," Suresh replied. "But we're starting to piece it together. Based on the data we've collected, it seems like this group might be working for interests that want to keep rural areas underdeveloped, possibly to control resources or maintain influence. By sabotaging your efforts, they're trying to send a message. Don't try to rise above your station." Ravi clenched his fists in anger. "We won't let them get away with this." "Agreed," Suresh said. "And we're closer than ever to finding out who's behind it. The code we found in the device is unique to a specific manufacturer. We've traced it back to a company that specializes in industrial electronics. I've already contacted them, and they're cooperating with the investigation. If we can trace the purchase of this device, we might be able to identify the buyer." The news was a breakthrough. Finally, they had a tangible lead. Suresh assured them that the police were working around the clock to trace the buyer and uncover more information about the organization behind the sabotage. As Priya and Ravi left the station, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had a lead, and it was only a matter of time before they had the evidence they needed to expose the saboteur and bring them to justice. But they also knew they couldn't afford to be complacent. The saboteur was still out there, and they had to stay vigilant. As they walked through the village, they discussed their next steps. "We need to keep the villagers informed," Priya said. "They deserve to know what's happening, and we can't let fear take over." Ravi nodded in agreement. "And we need to be prepared for anything. If the saboteur knows we're on to them, they might try something desperate." When they returned to Chandrapur, they called an emergency meeting with the village council and key community members. In the meeting, they explained what they had learned from Inspector Suresh, without divulging too many sensitive details that might compromise the investigation. The villagers listened intently, their faces a mix of relief and concern. Some were angry at the idea that an outside group was trying to sabotage their progress, while others were worried about what might happen next. "We understand the concerns," Priya said, addressing the crowd. "But we want to assure you that we're doing everything we can to protect the village and bring those responsible to justice. We need everyone to stay strong and united. This is our home, and we won't let anyone take that from us." Her words were met with nods of agreement, and slowly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The villagers were still anxious, but they were also resolved to stand together in the face of adversity. As the meeting concluded, Priya and Ravi stayed behind to speak with a few of the council members. They discussed the possibility of increasing security measures and reinforcing the systems that had been targeted. Everyone agreed that they needed to stay one step ahead of the saboteur. That evening, as Priya and Ravi sat together on the porch of the community center, watching the sunset, they reflected on the day's events. They were closer than ever to uncovering the truth, but the path ahead was still fraught with danger. "Do you think we'll find them soon?" Priya asked, her voice soft. Ravi took a deep breath. "I hope so. But even if we do, this isn't just about catching one person or one group. It's about protecting everything we've worked for, everything the village has built." Priya nodded. "We've come so far. We can't let them take that away from us." As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, they knew that the days ahead would be crucial. The saboteur's game was nearing its end, but they had to be ready for whatever came next. With their resolve stronger than ever, they prepared for the final steps in their battle to save Chandrapur. Chapter 71. The Trap is Set. Chandrapur had been operating under a cloud of tension ever since the sabotage began. Priya, Ravi, and Inspector Suresh had been working tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle that was a relentless attack on their village's progress. They had come too far to let everything fall apart, but with every new disruption, the sense of urgency grew. Now, with a solid lead in their hands, it was time to make their move. "We need to flush them out," Inspector Suresh said as he paced in the small conference room of the community center. Priya and Ravi sat at the table, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The only way to catch them is to make them think they've won. "How?" Ravi asked, leaning forward. "We've already tried baiting them with increased security. They're too careful." Suresh paused, thinking. "That's because they're reacting to what they believe is real. What if we feed them false information, something big enough to force their hand?" Priya's eyes lit up as she realized what Suresh was suggesting. "A fake upgrade," she said. "We spread the word that we're implementing a major infrastructure improvement, something they'd see as a critical target." Ravi nodded, catching on. "If they think it's a significant advancement, they'll have no choice but to try and sabotage it." The three of them spent the next few hours ironing out the details. They would announce a major upgrade to the village's power grid, complete with new technology and advanced systems. In reality, none of it would be real. It would be a well-crafted illusion designed to draw the saboteur out of hiding. "We'll need to make it convincing," Suresh warned. "This isn't just about spreading rumors. We'll have to make it look like the work is actually being done." Priya smiled. "Leave that to me." Over the next few days, Chandrapur buzzed with the news of the supposed upgrade. Priya and Ravi organized crews of villagers to appear as if they were installing new equipment and working on the power lines. Trucks carrying empty crates marked with the logos of technology companies rolled into the village, adding to the illusion. Engineers in uniforms, friends of Suresh who weren't on the plan, walked around with clipboards, pretending to supervise the installation. The villagers, who were let in on the plan, played their part well. Even the children got involved, excitedly telling each other about how much better the village would be once the new systems were in place. The atmosphere of hope and anticipation was almost enough to make Priya forget that it was all just a facade. As they went through the motions, Priya couldn't shake the knot of anxiety in her stomach. What if this didn't work? What if the saboteur was too smart to fall for their trap? The risk was enormous. They were dangling a false victory in front of their enemy, hoping it would be enough to lure them into making a mistake. "Are you sure about this?" Ravi asked her one evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day of setting the stage. Priya glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "No," she admitted, "but we don't have much of a choice. If we don't act, they'll keep chipping away at everything we built. We have to take the risk." Ravi squeezed her hand, offering her silent support. We'll get through this. Together. The next night, with the village eerily quiet, the tension was palpable. The upgrades were supposedly nearing completion, and everyone knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. Suresh had stationed officers at key points in the village, and hidden cameras had been set up to capture any suspicious activity. Priya, Ravi, and Suresh sat in the makeshift control room they had set up in the village hall, their eyes glued to the monitors showing live feeds from the cameras. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one filled with silent anticipation. Then, around midnight, one of the screens flickered. A figure moved in the shadows near the power station, a place that had been heavily advertised as the site of the new upgrades. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, moving cautiously but with a sense of purpose. "There," Suresh said quietly, pointing at the screen. The figure approached one of the boxes that had been placed outside the station, an empty shell designed to look like part of the new equipment. The figure knelt down, pulling out a small device from their bag. "They're trying to disable the system," Ravi whispered, his eyes wide. Priya's heart raced as she watched the figure work quickly, unaware that the system they were tampering with was a decoy. Suresh nodded to one of his officers, who quietly slipped out of the room to intercept the intruder. For several long minutes, Priya held her breath as the scene played out on monitors. The figure finished attaching the device to the box and stood up, looking around as if to make sure they hadn't been seen. But just as they turned to leave, Suresh's officer stepped out from behind a nearby building, blocking their path. "Freeze!" the officer shouted, his voice cutting through the night. The figure bolted, sprinting toward the edge of the village, but the officer was faster. He tackled the saboteur to the ground, pinning them in place as Suresh and Ravi rushed to the scene. Priya watched the monitors, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it. They had caught the saboteur. But as the officer pulled back the hood covering the figure's face, Priya's blood ran cold. It wasn't Amar. It was someone she had never seen before. The saboteur struggled against the officer's grip, but it was clear they had been caught. Suresh began questioning them immediately, but the figure remained tight-lipped, refusing to give any information about who they were or who they were working for. As they dragged the saboteur away, Priya felt a mix of triumph and dread. They had set the trap and caught someone, but it wasn't who they had expected. And if this was just a hired hand, the real mastermind was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next move. The game wasn't over yet. Chapter 72, An Unseen Threat. The capture of the saboteur should have been a victory, but Priya couldn't shake the feeling that something was still very wrong. The figure they had caught, a stranger not Amar, remained silent under interrogation. Even Inspector Suresh's most pointed questions elicited nothing more than blank stares and tight lips. Whoever this person was, they were either exceptionally loyal to their employer or utterly terrified of the consequences of speaking out. Priya and Ravi tried to focus on the silver lining. They had disrupted the sabotage. For the first time in weeks, things felt a little more stable in Chandrapur. The villagers resumed their routines, and Priya hoped that perhaps this shadowy figure had been the mastermind after all. But something deep inside her told her not to let her guard down. Ravi noticed her unease as they worked together to finalize some of the real upgrades they had promised to implement. "You're still worried, aren't you?" he asked, looking over at her as they inspected the power grid. Priya sighed, glancing up at the system they had so painstakingly rebuilt. "It just doesn't add up," she admitted. "If this person was the one behind all of this, why won't they talk? Why does it feel like there's something or someone we're missing?" Ravi nodded. He had been feeling the same discomfort. Maybe they're scared. Whoever hired them could be watching, making sure they don't spill any secrets. We need to dig deeper. Priya was silent for a moment before speaking. But that means there might still be others involved, even within the village itself. What if someone else is feeding information to the outside? Ravi tensed. "You think there could be a mole?" Priya shrugged helplessly. "I don't want to believe it, but we have to consider the possibility. Every time we think we've solved one problem, another one appears. There have been too many strange things happening. Random disruptions, doors being left open, power outages, small things that don't feel like accidents." That evening, as the village settled down for the night, Priya and Ravi discussed their concerns with Inspector Suresh. He agreed that there might be more going on than they initially thought. It's possible that someone on the inside is feeding information to this organization, he said gravely. We'll have to look into everyone who had access to the plans for the upgrades. No one could be above suspicion. The very idea of suspecting her fellow villagers filled Priya with dread. These were people she had known her whole life, people she trusted, but she knew that Suresh was right. If there was a mole within the village, they couldn't afford to overlook it. Over the next few days, the tension grew. Suresh quietly expanded his investigation, interviewing villagers who had been involved in the project. Priya found herself looking at people differently, wondering if the saboteur had an accomplice hiding in plain sight. She hated the suspicion that had wormed its way into her mind, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. Meanwhile, the small, strange disruptions continued. One morning, Priya found the door to the community center unlocked, even though she distinctly remembered locking it the night before. Another day, Ravi's tools went missing, only to turn up in a completely different location hours later. And then there were the power outages, brief but frequent, always happening at the most inconvenient times. They were small annoyances on the surface, but Priya couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected to something much larger. One night, as Priya and Ravi sat on their porch trying to unwind after another long day, the lights in the village flickered once again. This time, however, they didn't come back on. Not again, Ravi muttered, standing up and grabbing a flashlight. We just fixed the generator last week. This shouldn't be happening. Priya followed him into the night, her mind racing. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone was doing this on purpose. The saboteur may have been captured, but the village was still being targeted, and whoever was responsible was getting bolder. Ravi and Priya made their way to the power station, where a few other villagers had already gathered. They were examining the generator, which appeared to be functioning normally. There's no reason for it to have failed, one of the villagers said, shaking his head in frustration. Priya frowned, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. She glanced around, trying to see if anyone was lurking nearby, watching them, but the night was still and nothing seemed out of place. I don't like this, she whispered to Ravi. It's like someone's toying with us. Ravi nodded in agreement. I know, but what can we do? We've already beefed up security. We've caught one of the saboteurs. We're doing everything we can. Priya bit her lip, frustration bubbling inside her. It's not enough, she said quietly. We need to figure out who's helping them from the inside. The next day, Priya decided to take matters into her own hands. She began quietly investigating the small disruptions herself, starting with the power outages. She combed the village's maintenance logs, looking for any patterns or irregularities. She spoke with villagers who had been near the scenes of disturbances, hoping to find a clue that would point her in the right direction. But the more she dug, the more elusive the answers became. It was as if someone was deliberately covering their tracks, moving just fast enough to stay one step ahead of her. Priya's frustration grew with each passing day. She felt as though she were chasing shadows, always just out of reach. And with every new disruption, her suspicions deepened. She hated to think it, but it seemed increasingly likely that someone within the village was working against them, helping the saboteurs from the inside. One evening, as Priya sat alone in her small office, she stared at the list of villagers she had been investigating. It felt wrong to suspect people she had known and trusted her entire life, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. She had to find out who was behind this, no matter the cost. Just as she was about to give up for the night, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ravi, who had stayed behind at the power station to oversee some final repairs. I found something strange, the message read. Meet me at the station. Priya's heart raced as she grabbed her keys and rushed out the door. Something told her that whatever Ravi had found could be the key to unraveling the entire mystery. But as she made her way through the darkened streets of Chandrapur, her mind couldn't help but linger on the fear that had been gnawing at her for weeks. The saboteur had been caught, but the true threat was still out there, unseen but ever-present. Chapter 73. The Unraveling. The night air was cool as Priya hurried through the streets toward the power station. Her heart pounded with each step, her mind racing. Ravi's message had been brief but urgent. He had found something. After weeks of dead ends and suspicion, Priya clung to the hope that whatever Ravi had discovered might finally bring them closer to the truth. When she arrived at the power station, Ravi was waiting for her outside, his expression serious. He motioned for her to follow him inside without saying a word. The station was dimly lit, the soft hum of the generator, the only sound in the building. "What did you find?" Priya whispered as they walked deeper into the building. Ravi led her to the far end of the room, where he had set up a small workbench. On the bench sat a cluster of wires, circuits, and what appeared to be a small transmitter, something that didn't belong in the power station. It was a device designed for surveillance and remote tampering. "I found this hidden behind one of the panels," Ravi said quietly, his voice laced with tension. Whoever placed it there was using it to manipulate the power grid remotely. Priya's eyes widened as she stared at the device. This is how they've been causing the outages," she said. "They've been controlling it from a distance." Ravi nodded grimly. "I've already disabled it, but this changes everything. Someone in the village must have had access to the station to plant this. They've been here the entire time, right under our noses." Priya felt a wave of anger wash over her. All this time, while we were looking for outsiders, someone from our own village was working with the saboteurs. They've been betraying us. Ravi sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I hate to say it, but it looks that way. We have to be careful now. Whoever's behind this knows we're onto them." Priya nodded, her mind racing. "We need to find out who's been accessing the power station and when. If we can narrow it down to a few people, we might be able to catch them." The two of them spent the next hour reviewing the logs of the power station. They meticulously combed through records, cross-referencing access times with the known disruptions. Slowly but surely, a pattern began to emerge. There were only a handful of people who had regular access to the station, and one name appeared more often than the others. Priya's heart sank when she saw the name, Karen, one of the village elders. He had always been well respected, a steady voice in community meetings, and a close confidant of her father before he had passed away. The idea that Karen could be involved in the sabotage was difficult to process, but the evidence was damning. Ravi noticed her reaction. "I know it's hard to believe," he said softly, "but we have to follow the evidence. If Karen is a mole, we need to act quickly before he realizes we're onto him." Priya nodded slowly. "We need to be careful. If he's been working with the saboteurs, he could have connections we don't know about. We can't confront him directly, not yet." They decided to keep their findings to themselves for the time being, at least until they had more concrete proof. But it wasn't easy. Every time Priya saw Karen around the village, she felt a knot of tension in her stomach. He continued to go about his business as usual, participating in village meetings and offering his advice on community matters. To anyone else, he appeared perfectly normal. But to Priya, every word he spoke now felt like a potential lie. A few days later, as the village gathered for a festival, Priya and Ravi kept a watchful eye on Karen. He moved through the crowd with ease, laughing and chatting with other villagers as though nothing were wrong. But Priya couldn't help but notice the subtle glances he exchanged with certain individuals, quick, almost imperceptible looks that suggested he was communicating with someone in the know. "We need to find out who he's talking to," Ravi whispered to her during a lull in the festival. "If he's working with someone else, they might be in the crowd right now." Priya nodded, her eyes scanning the gathering. She felt a surge of determination. They were so close to unraveling the mystery that had plagued them for so long. If they could just catch Karen in the act, they might finally be able to put an end to the sabotage once and for all. As the night wore on, Priya and Ravi continued to monitor Karen discreetly. At one point, they saw him slip away from the main festivities, heading toward a more secluded part of the village. Priya's heart raced as she and Ravi quietly followed him, staying far enough back to avoid detection. They watched as Karen stopped near an old, abandoned barn on the outskirts of the village. A figure stepped out from the shadows to meet him, someone Priya didn't recognize. The two of them spoke in hushed tones, exchanging something that Priya couldn't make out from her position. "This is it," Ravi whispered, his eyes locked on the scene in front of them. "We need to record this. It's the proof we need." Priya nodded, quickly pulling out her phone and capturing the interaction on video. They waited until Karen and the stranger parted ways before slipping back into the village. their hearts pounding with the weight of what they had just witnessed. That night, as they reviewed the footage, Priya felt a mixture of relief and dread. They finally had the evidence they needed to confront Karen, but it came at a heavy cost. The betrayal of someone so close to the community would shake Chandrapur to its core. "We'll need to take this to Suresh," Ravi said quietly. "He'll know how to handle it." Priya agreed, though the thought of turning in someone she had known her entire life filled her with sadness. But there was no other option. Karen had chosen his side, and now they had to do what was best for the village. As they prepared to confront Karen and expose his role in the sabotage, Priya couldn't help but wonder how deep the conspiracy went. Karen may have been the mole, but who else was involved? And more importantly, who was pulling the strings from behind the scenes? The answers were closer than ever, but Priya knew that the final unraveling would come at a price. The village of Chandrapur was about to face its most difficult test yet, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 74, The Confrontation. The morning light was soft as it filtered through the trees of Chandrapur, casting long shadows on the village as Priya and Ravi made their way to Inspector Suresh's office. The heaviness of what they were about to do weighed on them, making each step feel longer than the last. They had gathered enough evidence to confront Karen, but the betrayal of the village elder, someone so deeply trusted, was a bitter pill to swallow. When they arrived, Suresh was already waiting for them, his face serious but calm. Priya handed him the video footage they had taken the previous night. He watched it silently, his brow furrowing as Karen's clandestine meeting with a stranger played out on the screen. "This is solid," Suresh finally said, setting the phone down. "I didn't want to believe it, but you were right. Karen has been working against us this whole time." Priya nodded, her expression grim. "We couldn't bring this to anyone else. It was spread too fast, and Karen could have slipped away." Suresh agreed. "We need to confront him quietly. If we do this in public, it could cause a panic. There are still people who trust him. This could divide the village if we're not careful." "Do you think he'll confess?" Ravi asked. Suresh leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing in thought. "People like Karen don't often confess easily. He's been playing a dangerous game, and if he's willing to betray his own people, he might not give up without a fight. Then how do we handle it?" Priya asked. "We can't risk letting him slip away, but we also can't create a scene that tears the village apart." Suresh's eyes hardened with determination. "We'll do it carefully. I'll call Karen in for a routine checkup on the sabotage investigation. He won't suspect anything at first. Once he's here, we'll confront him with the evidence." The plan was set, and later that day, Karen arrived at Suresh's office under the guise of routine questioning. He was as composed as ever, greeting Suresh, Priya, and Ravi with his usual warmth and calm demeanor. For a moment, it was difficult to reconcile the friendly elder in front of them with the man who had betrayed their trust. Suresh started with small talk, asking Karen about recent village events and his thoughts on the progress they had made in securing the power grid. Karen answered smoothly, showing no signs of discomfort. But when Suresh finally brought up the sabotage and mentioned the device they had found in the power station, Priya saw a flicker of tension in Karen's eyes. "I'm glad you found the device," Karen said, his voice steady but a little too casual. Whoever planned it was clearly determined to cause chaos. Priya felt her anger rise. How could he sit there and lie so effortlessly? She exchanged a glance with Ravi, who looked equally unsettled. Suresh, however, remained calm and continued pressing Karen for details. "I have to ask Karen," Suresh said, leaning forward. "You've been involved in this village's affairs for years. You had access to the power station, the town systems, and the plans. We've noticed that your name comes up frequently in the access logs during the times of the sabotage." Karen's expression remained neutral, but Priya could see the shift in his posture, tense, defensive. "I've been around the power station many times," Karen said. "I helped with the initial installation years ago. It wouldn't be unusual to see my name in the logs." "True," Suresh agreed. "But then there's this." He pulled up the video footage on his phone and placed it on the desk between them. Karen's face stiffened as he watched himself meeting the stranger outside the abandoned barn. The silence in the room was palpable. Karen's usually calm demeanor cracked slightly, his lips tightening. He glanced from the phone to Suresh, then to Priya and Ravi, who were both watching him closely. "You've been helping them," Priya said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. All this time, while we've been working to rebuild the village, you've been sabotaging us from within. Why, Karen? Why betray your own people? Karen looked down at his hands, the weight of the confrontation finally hitting him. For a moment, it seemed as though he might confess, but then his expression hardened. You don't understand, he said, his voice low but firm. I did what I had to do. What are you talking about? Ravi asked, his voice sharp with frustration. You've been working with saboteurs. Who knows how much damage they've done because of you? Karen's eyes flashed with a mixture of defiance and regret. I did want to come to this, he said, standing up abruptly. But you're all so blind. The village has been doomed for years. We've been clinging to traditions that hold us back, refusing to change. I've been trying to save us from ourselves. By sabotaging us? Priya asked incredulously. By working with people who want to destroy everything we built? I didn't have a choice, Karen snapped, his voice rising. The people I'm working with, they have power, influence. They promised to help modernize Chandrapur, to make it prosperous again. But they needed leverage. They needed control over the village's infrastructure to force the changes we've been too stubborn to accept. Priya felt a chill run down her spine. So you sold us out, she said quietly. You gave them control in exchange for their promises. Karen's face softened, but there was no remorse in his eyes. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could keep them from going too far. But things spiraled out of control. They wanted more than I could give. Suresh stood up, his voice calm but authoritative. It's over, Karen. We have enough evidence to charge you with sabotage and conspiracy. You'll have a chance to explain yourself, but for now, you need to come with me. Karen didn't resist as Suresh placed him under arrest. His shoulders sagged with resignation, as if the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. As he was let out of the office, Priya couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. This man had once been a respected leader in the village, a mentor to her father, and now he had been reduced to this, a traitor working for people who sought to destroy their way of life. Once Karen was gone, the room was silent for a moment. Priya felt a mix of emotions, relief that they had uncovered the truth, but also a lingering sense of betrayal. It's not over, she said softly. Karen may have been working with them, but there's more to this. Whoever he was meeting, they're still out there. Ravi nodded in agreement. We've stopped one part plan, but there's more going on. We need to figure out who's really pulling the strings behind the scenes. Suresh looked at them both, his face serious. You're right. This goes deeper than Karen. We've taken a big step, but the real fight is just beginning. As they left the office, the sun was beginning to set over Chandrapur, casting a warm golden glow over the village. Priya took a deep breath, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but feeling more determined than ever to protect her home from those who sought to destroy it.